The frost blooms on the windows like frozen breath, each tendril curling toward the kitchen's heart where I stand on the cracked linoleum. My fingers, slick with cold sweat from the combat drug, brush the diary's cover. It's not leather, it's cold, yielding, like the inside of a dead throat. As I touch it, the room exhales. A low, wet rustle from the pantry door, its hinges protesting like old bones. Creak, creak. The sound isn't just heard. It's a physical pressure, a slow, deliberate intrusion into my skull. The cat pads into view, fur dripping onto the floorboards, each drop a tiny cold bell. Its coat is soaked through, glistening black, yet the air stays dry. It walks past the closed door to the storage closet, stepping through the wood as if it was smoke dripping onto the diary's cover. The film reel. This cursed thing shivers under my knuckles. The frost on the windows melts into a slick, icy trail down my forearm. I feel it then, the shadow's weight, pressing against my chest like a child's head, heavy with silent accusation. Tivy, my child, my little ghost. Phew. The real surface is warm, pulsing faintly beneath my touch, the texture like sun-bleached bone. I can't look away. The sprocket teeth grind, scritch, 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 like broken molars being forced apart. Frost from the window melts into my knuckles, not cold but thick, syrupy, clinging like the memory of her last breath. The cat pauses, head tilted, its purr a low, wet vibration in the air, a sound like a clock winding down. The shadow presses harder, a physical weight now, squeezing my ribs. Her eyes. Always her eyes. The film reel's image flickers in the corner of my vision, not the station's sterile walls, but the rain-slick street, the screech of tires, the awful final silence. The cat's dripping fur hits the reel. Drip, drop. The frost on my knuckles turns to liquid, running down my wrist, warm and metallic. The shadow's weight becomes a hand, fingers splayed across my sternum, cold and insistent. The film reel sprocket teeth grind with a sound like teeth grinding in a coffin. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Frost melts into my knuckles, thick and slow, a river of cold. The cat walks through the closed door again, wet fur leaving a trail of dark water on the reel's surface. The shadow's weight presses deeper, a silent scream against my ribs. The reel's image flares, a small hand cold and limp, reaching for me in the rain. For Sanity, my child. My child. The sprocket teeth grind like broken molars. The frost melts into my knuckles. The reel's teeth grind against my palm, a sound like a rusted hinge being dragged across a grave. I drag it through the corridor, the metal of the floor scraping against the film's casing, a low, wet, the scrape, 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 scrape that echoes in the hollow bones of the station. My fingers are slick with cold sweat, the combat drug burning through my veins, turning my thoughts to static. The shadow presses harder against my chest now, a weight that mimics the final breath of my child, the one I failed to save. It's not a memory, it's a phantom, a hand splayed across my sternum, fingers digging in like claws. Frost blooms on the windows again. But this time, it's not just on the glass. It spreads across the walls, the floor, the ceiling, a slow, creeping sickness that turns everything to bruised sky blue. The cat walks through the closed bulkhead, its fur still dripping, though the air is dry, though the station's vents are silent. Its purring is a sound that doesn't belong to a cat, but to a clock, a metronome counting down to something I can't name. Tick, tick, tick. It's not just a sound, it's a vibration, a pressure in my skull, in my ribs, in the very marrow of my bones. The corridor stretches behind me, the film reel dragging across the floor, its sprocket teeth scraping against the concrete, a sound that feels like a scream being dragged through a throat. My breath comes in shallow gasps, the combat drug making my vision blur, my thoughts spiral. I see her again, my child, her small hand reaching for me in the rain, her eyes wide, empty, the rain running in rivulets down her face. The shadow presses deeper, a weight that now feels like a hand, cold and insistent, pressing into my lungs, into my throat. I can't breathe, I can't move, I can't think. The cat pauses, its fur glowing with the same bruised sky blue as the frost. Its eyes are black voids, bottomless and endless, and for a moment I think I see something in them. Something that looks like my child, but not my child. It's a reflection, a distortion, a memory that isn't mine. The purring stops, the scraping stops. The station is silent, save for the sound of my own breath, shallow and broken. The shadow pressing harder, harder, until I think I hear it. Her voice, faint but clear, coming from the reel. Mama. The sound is wet, like a drop of water falling into a pool, and it echoes in my chest, in my ears, in the very marrow of my bones. The cat's fur glows brighter, the bruised sky blue seeping into the air, into the walls, into me. The reel plays. The reel's sprocket teeth grind against my palm. A wet the scrape, scrape, scrape. Scrape that echoes like a knife being dragged across a frozen lake. I drag it through the corridor, the metal of the floor scraping against the film's casing. The sound like a scream being dragged through a throat. My fingers are slick with cold sweat, the combat drug burning through my veins, turning my thoughts to static. The shadow presses harder against my chest now, a weight that mimics the final breath of my child, the one I failed to save. It's not a memory, it's a phantom, a hand splayed across my sternum, fingers digging in like claws. Frost blooms on the windows again, but this time it's not just on the glass. It spreads across the walls, the floor, the ceiling, a slow creeping sickness that turns everything to bruised sky blue. The cat walks through the closed bulkhead, its fur still dripping, though the air is dry, though the station's vents are silent. Its purring is a sound that doesn't belong to a cat, but to a clock, a metronome counting down to something I can't name. Tick, tick, tick. It's not just a sound, it's a vibration, a pressure in my skull, in my ribs, in the very marrow of my bones. The corridor stretches behind me, the film reel dragging across the floor, its sprocket teeth scraping against the concrete, a sound that feels like a scream being dragged through a throat. My breath comes in shallow gasps, the combat drug making my vision blur, my thoughts spiral. I see her again, my child, her small hand reaching for me in the rain, her eyes wide, empty, the rain running in rivulets down her face. The shadow presses deeper, a weight that now feels like a hand, cold and insistent, pressing into my lungs, into my throat. I can't breathe. I can't move. I can't think. The cat pauses, its fur glowing with the same bruised sky blue as the frost. Its eyes are black voids, bottomless and endless. And for a moment I think I see something in them. Something that looks like my child, but not my child. It's a reflection, a distortion, a memory that isn't mine. The purring stops. The scraping stops. The station is silent, save for the sound of my own breath, shallow and broken. The shadow pressing harder, harder, until I think I hear it, her voice, faint but clear, coming from the reel. Mama. The sound is wet, like a drop of water falling into a pool, and it echoes in my chest, in my ears, in the very marrow of my bones. The cat's fur glows brighter, the bruised sky blue seeping into the air, into the walls, into me. The reel plays. I see it now. Fossilized remains of violence, the film showing not just my child's face, but the faces of others, their eyes wide, empty, their mouths open in silent screams. I try to switch it off, to tear the film from the projector, but my hands are frozen, my body locked in place. The cat walks through the closed door, leaving a trail of frost on the reel. Its purring resumes, a slow, deliberate tick-tock, a doomsday clock. A doomsday clock counting down to something I can't name. I can't move. I can't think. I can't breathe. The concrete hums beneath my fingertips like a tuning fork struck too hard. The cat's prints are still there, 4 shallow depressions, each one filled with a slick sheen of moisture that wasn't there before. My breath fogs in the air, not from cold, but from the weight of the drug still clawing at my veins. I press my palm to the tunnel wall, and the frost blooms under my skin, a bruise of blue spreading across the rough surface. The bones are already showing, not just fragments, footprints. A child's, tiny and delicate, pressed into the concrete, like the last gasp of someone who never meant to leave. The air tastes of rusted nails and old blood. I crouch lower, the film reel dragging behind me like a leash. The projector's hum is a low, rhythmic throb in my teeth vibrating through my skull. The cat's purring drowns it out, a metronome counting down to something I don't want to name. The frost cracks under my knees with a sound like dry twigs snapping, each fracture revealing more of the bones beneath. They're not just prints anymore. They're a trail, a path, and at the end of it, the concrete splits open like a rotting apple, the edges jagged and black as burnt ivory. The shadow lifts. Not all at once, it peels away from my chest like wet paper, the weight of it rolling off my ribs in a wave of cold. I can breathe again. Or I think I can. The air is thick with the scent of something wet and organic, something that doesn't belong in a tunnel. The cat's tail flicks a single, deliberate lash, and the concrete splits wider, the fracture hissing like steam on a hot plate. They're moving. The reel plays, not the static, not the faces. Just her. My child's small hands pressing into the concrete, her feet leaving prints that stretch too long, too thin, like she's being pulled. The film jerks, the image stuttering like a broken record. Her head turns, slow, too slow. And when she looks at me, her eyes aren't empty, they're full of something that isn't fear. It's recognition, the kind that comes just before the knife drops. The cat's purring stops. The tunnel goes silent except for the sound of my own breath, ragged and wet in my throat. The concrete is splitting now, the fracture creeping toward me like a vein of black tar. The bones shift, the footprints deepen, and then a sound, not a crack, not a snap, a whisper, but it's not in my ears. It's in my bones, in the marrow. In the places where the shadow used to press, the concrete is splitting. The cat's tail flicks again, and the world twin breaks it. The bruise on the sky deepens, like someone is pressing down hard from above, squeezing out every last drop of light until it is nothing but an oily stain against the glass. The windows groan under the weight of it, their old frames creaking like tired joints, each sound a slow grind of metal teeth chewing through concrete. My reflection stares back at me, warped and distorted by the frost that clings to the window pane like wet cobwebs. My breath comes heavy now, fogging up the glass, each exhale painting over my face with condensation until I'm barely there anymore. Just a smudge of warmth against the cold, and then it moves. My shadow doesn't shift gradually or subtly. It is more like someone has taken an axe to the darkness and carved out chunks from its form. It presses hard into me, not just at my back but all over, as if I've been wrapped in wet paper that sticks to every curve of my body. The weight is sudden, suffocating. A physical pressure that pushes down on my chest like a hand made of stone. The cat looks up from where it sits, tail flicking idly against the cold floor tiles. Its eyes meet mine briefly before returning to their own reflection in the window pane. There is something almost smug about its expression, a feline satisfaction at seeing me struggle under this sudden burden. I try to move, but my limbs feel heavy now, sluggish and slow as if I'm wading through deep water instead of standing still on solid ground. The film reel drags behind me like an anchor, the projector's hum growing louder in protest until it is a low throb vibrating against my teeth. The shadow shifts again, this time lifting slightly from where it presses into my chest. Relief floods through me briefly before turning to dread as I realize what that means. It is not leaving, it is moving on to something else. The cat stands suddenly all grace and fluidity despite the chill in the air, and pads over to one of the windows. It doesn't just walk through like usual, not this time. This time, its paw presses against the glass, claws extending slightly as if testing the surface before pushing harder until there is a faint cracking sound, a slow creak building up pressure behind it. The cat purrs louder now, almost drowning out the projector's hum. The frost melts into the shadow's form where it touches my chest first, slowly then faster and faster like ice under hot water. As each piece of darkness disappears back inside me, I can feel something else moving beneath my skin. A cold current flowing through my veins that has nothing to do with blood or heartbeat. It starts as a faint whisper in the depths of my mind, a rustling sound like dry leaves being blown along concrete, but quickly grows louder until it is echoing within every bone cavity. The cat's purrs rise higher too, matching pace with the growing noise inside me until they're indistinguishable from one another. One long continuous wail that grates against my skull, and then everything stops. The cat freezes mid-purr, its tail held high like a flag waving defiance at something unseen. The projector's hum stutters and dies altogether as the film reel comes to an abrupt end with a harsh click. Click, the sound of gears grinding together without any oil left between them. And then, a whisper. Not from inside me this time, but coming through the window instead, carried on the sudden chill that seeps into my bones despite the drug coursing hotly through my veins. It is not words, not even sounds, but a presence nonetheless, an ancient pressure pushing against the glass until it groans under the strain. The cat watches me now, its eyes wide and unblinking, as if waiting for something, anything at all, to happen next, and I realize then that this isn't just about my child anymore or even myself. This is bigger than any one person could ever comprehend, a cosmic force pushing down on us from above, like a bruise spreading across the sky. The cat's tail twitches once more before lowering slowly towards the floor, and with it goes every last hope I had left inside me, because there, pressed against my chest again, but stronger now. So much stronger. I can feel something else moving beneath that weight, time running out. The film reel wasn't a memory. It was the receiver. The realization hit me like a physical blow, sending a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me, amplified by the drug's jittery hum. The projector's light, once a comforting beacon in the encroaching gloom, now felt like an interrogation lamp. Each frame flickered, not with images of my daughter's laughter, but with the broadcast itself, DT the signal. A signal from where. The shadow pressed against my chest again, a damp weight. I tasted copper on my tongue, a phantom tang that clung to the back of my throat. The air felt thick, viscous, like breathing through oil. I wanted to claw it out, to rip the film reel from its housing and shatter it. But my limbs remained sluggish, bound by the drug's insistent pull. The cat, that damned, perpetually damp creature, padded across the floor, its wet fur leaving glistening trails on the cold tiles. It paused before a doorhead leading to the reactor core, and without hesitation, passed through it. Not with a shimmer, not with a ripple, but with a solid thudded thud of fur against metal. A wet, sucking sound followed, like a drain clearing. My breath hitched. I fought against the encroaching panic, the rising tide of hysteria that threatened to drown me. The combat drug was supposed to sharpen my focus, to blunt the edges of fear, but it only amplified the horror, layering it with a frantic, buzzing energy. My thoughts fractured, splintering into a million shards of paranoia. Was this real? Was I losing my mind? I stumbled toward the reactor door, the film reel's hum a relentless drone in my ears. Each step sent a jolt of pain through my legs, a dull ache that resonated deep within my bones. The air grew colder, sharper, smelling faintly of ozone. I reached for the door handle, the metal slick and cold against my skin. The projector whirred, the film advancing to a new frame. This time, it wasn't a memory. It was a schematic, a diagram of the space station's power grid overlaid with a complex network of symbols I didn't recognize. They pulsed with a sickly green light like bioluminescent parasites feeding on the metal. My hand trembled as I pulled the door open. A blast of frigid air rushed out, carrying with it the metallic rasp of something grinding against metal. The reactor core hummed, a low guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the station. The cat was there, bathed in the eerie green light. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking through me, its eyes reflecting the pulsing symbols on the schematic. Its tail twitched, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver crawling down my spine. The sprocket teeth ground, a sudden, violent protest against the film's relentless advance. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the next frame, the next revelation. The broadcast was accelerating. I couldn't stop it. I fouilled, then silence. The projector sputtered, the film grinding to a halt with a final definitive click. The hum ceased. The green light vanished. The cat's purr, that insidious rhythmic ticking stopped. It hung in the air, a sudden, suffocating absence. The silence was worse than any noise. It pressed against my eardrums, a vacuum threatening to implode my skull. I opened my eyes. The cat was still there, but it was different. Its fur seemed to have lost its damp sheen. Its eyes no longer held that unsettling smugness. They were empty, hollow pits of blackness staring into something beyond me, something I couldn't see, and then the weight vanished. The shadow lifted completely from my chest. Relief flooded through me, brief and fleeting before being replaced by a deeper, more profound dread. The absence of pressure was more terrifying than the pressure itself. It felt like the removal of a vital organ. The silence stretched, taut and brittle, threatening to snap. And then, a sound, not a whisper this time, but a cessation, a complete and utter absence of sound. The kind of silence that swallows everything. The cat's purr was a ticking clock, slow and deliberate, each deferred thud, a second slipping away from the edges of my sanity. It wasn't a sound. It was a weight, a pressure in my chest, a sensation of being crushed by the slow, grinding inevitability of time. The film reel had fallen from my hands, now pressing against the cold floor, its edges curling like the lips of something that had just spoken. I could feel it in the marrow of my bones. The way the shadow had pressed into me, the way the weight had grown heavier, heavier still, until it felt like my ribs were cracking under the pressure. The cat walked through the reactor door. Not with a sound, not with a whisper, but with a thud, a wet, glistening thud that echoed in the hollow of my throat. I wanted to scream, but my lungs had turned to stone, and the only sound I could make was the dry, rattling cough that came from the back of my throat. The frost was spreading now, creeping up the walls, up the steel bulkhead, up the edges of my vision. It was not a frost like the kind that clung to the outside of the space station, but something darker, something that clung to the air itself, thick and suffocating, like a breath of something ancient and hungry. I stepped forward, my boots crunching against the frost, the sound like the tearing of wet parchment. The reactor core was humming again, but this time it was not a low, guttural growl. It was a high-pitched whine, like the sound of a violin string being drawn across a bone. The cat was still there, still watching me, its eyes hollow and unblinking. I could see the frost creeping across its fur, forming a thin, crystalline sheen that shimmered in the dim light. It was not wet anymore. It was frozen. The weight on my chest was unbearable now, a crushing pressure that made my breath come in short, shallow gasps. I could feel it pressing into my lungs, into my ribs, into the very core of my being. It was the shadow, the thing that had been with me since the beginning, The thing that had whispered to me in the dark, the thing that had shown me the film reel, the thing that had shown Gavine, me the drug. It was not a shadow. It was something else, something older, something that had been waiting for this moment. The cat turned its head, its eyes still fixed on me, and the frost on its fur began to crack, to splinter, to fall away in delicate, glittering shards. I could feel the weight on my chest begin to shift, to move, to pour pressy again. And this time it was not just pressure. A searing white-hot pain that lands through my chest, through my ribs, through my lungs, and I could feel it spreading until I could feel it in Effie, until I could feel it in every nerve, every sinew, every cell of my body. And then the reactor glowed, not with the sickly green light of the schematic, not with the pale, flickering glow of the projector, but with a deep, bruised sky blue that pulsed like a heartbeat, like a thing that was Sunday alive. The cat's purr was still ticking, still thudding, and I could feel the weight on my chest begin to rise, to lift, to fondu pressy again, and this time I knew. I knew what was coming. I knew what the broadcast was. I knew what I was. The film reel spun, a jerky, nauseating dance of fractured light. It wasn't the expected pastoral scene, not the fabricated memories they'd implanted. This was wrong. It was a tableau of bone. Tiny fractured bones, scattered across what appeared to be a faded, floral blanket. The blue light pulsed, a sickly rhythm against the frost, creeping up the walls, now a thick, granular layer. A metallic tang filled my mouth, the taste of old blood and something else, something acrid and indefinable. The cat's purr intensified, a low, insistent grind against my teeth. Thud. Each pulse of the blue light seemed to carve deeper into my skull. The combat drug, the aggression, the clarity, it was receding, leaving a yawning emptiness in its wake. My hands trembled, the knuckles bone white against the cold steel of the reactor floor. I wanted to scream, to claw at the film, to rip it from the projector, but my limbs felt weighted, submerged in viscous fluid. The bones shifted on the reel. A tiny hand, perfectly formed, yet impossibly small. A miniature shoe, the leather cracked and brittle. The image felt tactile. I could almost feel the grit of the dirt clinging to the tiny fingers, the chill of the floral blanket against my skin. The memory wasn't just visual, it was a visceral assault. A wave of nausea slammed into me, a cold, suffocating pressure. The frost on the reel began to crack, spiderwebbing across the celluloid. A sound, sharp and brittle, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Crack, crack, crack. Each fracture seemed to resonate within my own skull. The shadow hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't even breathed. It simply fully watched of the silent predatory observer. The weight on my chest pressed harder, a physical manifestation of guilt and a horror, so profound it threatened to unravel my sanity. My vision blurred, the edges of the scene dissolving into a bruised sky haze. The blue light pulsed, a hypnotic beat. I tasted something bitter on my tongue, a coppery tang that clung to the back of my throat. The purring, it wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration, a tremor that resonated deep within my bones, a countdown. The film reel lurched, the images becoming more grotesque, more fragmented. A tiny skull, perfectly preserved, stared back at me with empty sockets. The floral blanket now stained with a dark, viscous substance that I didn't want to name. The weight on my chest constricted, a vice tightening around my lungs. My legs buckled, and I stumbled, catching myself on a cold, metallic pipe. The drug was gone. The aggression, the focus, the manufactured strength, all evaporated, leaving me exposed, vulnerable. The memory wasn't just a memory, it was a fire revelation. A horrifying truth laid bare in a cascade of fractured images and bone dust. The cat's purr intensified, a relentless, inescapable rhythm. Food. The shadow began to detach itself from the glass. Not a sudden movement, but a slow, deliberate separation. A peeling away of darkness from the surface. The frost on its form thickened, coalescing into a crystalline armor. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was something else. Something solid. Something presenty. The metallic rasp of its form against the floor was the only sound louder than the ticking. The blue light intensified, bathing the reactor room in an unearthly glow. The film reel spun faster, the images blurring into an indistinguishable chaos of bone and floral patterns. My breath hitched in my throat, a strangled gasp. I wanted to close my eyes to shut out the horror, but I couldn't. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own mind, forced to witness the unfolding of my own nightmare. The shadow stepped free of the glass, its form coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape, but distorted, elongated. Wrong. It turned its head, and I saw its eyes. Not eyes, but pits of absolute darkness, swallowing the blue light whole. The cat's purr reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that filled my skull. Thud, thud, thud. The shadow extended a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, tipped with claws that shimmered with frost. And then it spoke. Not with a voice, but with a thought, a cold, invasive presence that slammed into my mind. It's time. The film reel shuddered, its jerky motion now slower, more deliberate, as if it were dragging itself through the marrow of my bones. The blue light pulsed, a sickly, unrelenting rhythm, and the frost on the walls thickened, spreading like a slow, silent infection. I could feel it now, this weight on my chest, a phantom hand pressing down, crushing my ribs, my lungs, my very will to breathe. My fingers curled into the cold metal of the pipe, my knuckles white, my breath shallow and ragged. The reel flickered, and there was a face. Not the shadow's face, not the hollow pits of darkness, but a face I knew. My child's face, pale and still, eyes wide and unblinking, lips parted in a soundless scream. Her voice, a whisper, a tremor in the air, a vibration that resonated in my throat, in my molars, in my bones. Mama. The sound of her voice was the sound of a door creaking open very slowly, a slow, grinding rasp, a sound that filled the space between my heartbeats. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to flee, but my body was frozen. The shadow stepped forward, its form now fully coalesced, its crystalline armor gleaming with a sickly blue light. It reached out, its skeletal fingers long and jagged, and took the film reel from the projector. The reel spun in its grasp, the images blurring into a grotesque, indistinguishable chaos. The shadow tilted its head, and I saw its face again, empty, hollow, and then it was holding my child's hand, tiny and cold, the fingers curled, the palm upturned as if waiting for something. The frost spread across the station, a slow, creeping tide, a white, granular layer that consumed everything in its path. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, each surface was now a canvas for this pale, invasive growth. I could feel it on my skin, a prickling, crawling sensation, like 1,000 needles pressing against my flesh. My breath came in shallow, broken gasps, each one a struggle, each one a reminder of the weight on my chest. The cat's purr intensified, a low, insistent grind, a sound that resonated in my bones, in my throat, in my molars. It walked through a closed door, the sound of the door creaking open very slowly, a slow, grinding rasp, a sound that filled the space between my heartbeats. I watched it go, my child's hand still in the shadow's grasp, the reel still spinning, the images still blurring into a grotesque, indistinguishable chaos. And then, the reel displayed the tunnel's entrance, a dark, gaping maw, a fissure in the floor, a void that seemed to pulse with a slow, rhythmic beat. The shadow stepped forward, its form now fully coalesced, its crystalline armor gleaming with a sickly blue light. It reached out, its skeletal fingers long and jagged, and took my child's hand. And I was still here, trapped, a prisoner in my own mind, forced to witness the unfolding of my own nightmare. I dropped the reel into the reactor's throat, a sharp metallic clatter that echoed in the hollow of my skull. The film spooled downward, silent now, a black serpent vanishing into the humming core. My fingers stung where the cold metal had dug into my palms. The cat padded across the reactor door, fur plastered dark against its bones, each step a wet thifty-plink on the floor like beads of rain hitting a tin roof. It didn't look back, just walked through the closed door, the metal frame groaning open with a sound like a bone cracking under pressure, a slow, grinding rasp that made my teeth ache. The shadow stepped out of the glass, not from the projector, but from the reactor's own fractured viewport, where the blue light had been pooling. It coalesced from the shards of broken crystal, crystalline limbs clicking into place, each movement a series of sharp fintinxed against the metal floor. Its face was a void, but the child's hand, small, pale, fingers curled like a wilted flower, was still clasped in its grasp. The bruised sky, that sickly purple-gray haze from the station's viewport, filled the entire station now, bleeding through every window, a slow, silent flood of color that made the frost on the walls seem like a fever dream. I watched the shadow's form solidify, its skeletal fingers tightening around my child's wrist. The frost spread across the floor toward my feet, a creeping, gritty layer that felt like crushed glass under my soles. The cat's purr had been a low, rhythmic thrum in my bones, a sound I'd mistaken for the reactor's hum. But now it was gone. Not just silent. Gaganuthan. The absence was heavier than the weight on my chest, a vacuum where the purr had been. It wasn't a sound stopping, it was the further lack of sound becoming a physical thing, a cold draft sliding between my ribs where the purr should have been. The shadow tilted its head, the crystalline armor catching the bruised light. My child's eyes were still open, unblinking, her lips parted as if about to say something. The film reel's images were gone, replaced by the empty, waiting space where her face had been. The reactor's hum deepened, a steady mechanical pulse that had nothing to do with the purr. The station held its breath. The frost crept higher, covering my ankles, my knees, the weight of it pressing down, down. And the purr was gone, just silence. A silence that felt like the last note of a scream.